Welcome, team members, to yet another opportunity to refresh and refocus on the things that matter most. That, of course, being your safety, your livelihood, and your overall quality of life. This time, I believe it's important I share a personal story of what I witnessed a couple weeks back. While headed to Kansas City on an early Monday morning, a small white car driving down the highway in the southbound lane opposite of me had somehow not realized that traffic on the highway had come to a complete stop at the intersection ahead. Just as we all resumed driving at the green light, just out of the corner of my left eye, I see that small white car barreling towards the back of a semi at what seems to be full highway speed. In an instant, with the short squeal of brakes, comes a massive crash and the white car slamming into the back of that semi on the driver's side. I immediately pull over, get out. As I'm walking to the scene, it's immediately evident that it's going to be bad. Numerous thoughts run through my head about what types of injuries I'm going to see, if I'll need to do CPR. What happened? Was this person texting? Did they fall asleep? How did they not see the cars and semis in front of them on a flat highway with multiple other cars stopped? As I ran to the driver's side of the car, I was confident I was looking at a young college-age girl who had just lost her life. With eyes rolled back in her head, blood dripping from her hair, no signs of breathing, I was confident she was gone. Once we were able to pry the passenger door open, I was able to feel her pulse, and shockingly, it was strong. What seemed like minutes later, intense labored breathing began as she laid unconscious. The fire department arrived, and these amazing men and women immediately settled into their zone and started to sustain her life. They had to forcibly pull her body from the passenger side so they could intubate her and get more oxygen to her brain. As she laid there unconscious, and now a handful more people standing by, saying soft prayers, speaking sweetly to her to stay strong, and all of us seeing the fragility of life right before our eyes, I couldn't help but think about my wife and my kids and my own choices that can change our lives in the blink of an eye. I don't tell you this story to scare you. I don't tell you this story to glamorize an accident. I tell you this story because we all need to be reminded of the fragility of life. We need to be reminded that the choices we make, whether it's texting and driving or driving while tired, or put in industry terms, continuing to work overly fatigued, choosing not to lock out your equipment before working on it, or not wearing fall protection. I mean, the list goes on and on. Make good choices and be prepared to take responsibility for those choices. As far as this young girl, please keep her in your thoughts and prayers, as well as for her family and her friends, as they all deal with the stress and anxiety of seeing their daughter, their sister, their cousin, their friend fight for her life. As we transition from this heartbreaking story into this topic, it's a great time to lay out the importance of this training, which is on bloodborne pathogens. What is a bloodborne pathogen, you ask? Great question. Bloodborne pathogens are microorganisms such as a virus or bacteria that is carried in human blood and can cause disease. Do you want to take a guess at some of the most common types? Let me give you a little hint. One of the most famous ones has 3 letters. Did you guess it? HIV it is. 2 of the other more common types are hepatitis B and C. There's also one that just a few years ago was all over the news, and you would have thought we were on the cusp of a zombie apocalypse. Any guesses on that? Ebola, also a bloodborne pathogen. So what each of you need to understand is that all of you have the opportunity to be exposed to these pathogens. Maintenance and janitorial staff are cleaning up all sorts of nastiness each day. Anyone doing a blue-collar type job has the opportunity to get cuts, scrapes, lacerations, and all of the above. Of course, it's a given that medical practitioners and first responders are having to deal with protecting themselves from these bloodborne hazards on a daily basis. And what's crazy about their role is they often have to safely perform around these hazards in chaotic and almost war zone type scenarios where they're rushing in as first responders, just like the story I opened this training up with. Knowing how to effectively protect yourself from the student who vomits in the classroom, to the teammate who's cut their finger on a tool, to the accident victim that's needing medical assistance. It's critical that you learn how to protect yourself, and this training seeks to provide you with all of the necessary information to do just that. I'm going to start this section off with a question. Does OSHA or any other government entity require employees to administer first aid to a fellow injured coworker? The answer to this is no. So the real question then is, why does OSHA require employees to be trained on this subject, and in many cases trained annually when they're exposed to these biological hazards? The answer to this is actually quite simple. These governing agencies realize that cuts, scrapes, and other incidents that would expose a person to bodily fluids at the workplace is an unfortunate reality. They simply want you, the one that's selflessly going to come in and help out a fellow teammate or accident victim, to know how to properly protect yourself. So the following are some critical points that you have to remember. Number one is always know the plan. Every one of your work sites and facilities should have an exposure control plan for the specific position you work in. Obviously, different job functions will expose you to different hazards and a greater volume of potential hazards. The type of occupational exposure you have will determine the specific plan you follow. Check with your manager to make sure you know that plan. Number two, I want you to always assume. What I mean by that is I want you to always assume any blood or any bodily fluids you're exposed to carries a virus such as hepatitis or HIV. Using these universal precautions is what will ensure everyone follows the same strict procedures to keep you and your teammates safe, no matter what the assumption is about what a person might be carrying or some other specific scenario. Number three is always wear the proper personal protective equipment or PPE. Always take the extra few seconds to pause and get the proper PPE before assisting someone with first aid or cleanup of an area where bodily fluids has been present. Please realize when I say bodily fluids, this means feces and vomit as well. The PPE I want you to have ready are latex gloves, safety glasses to protect against splatter in your eyes, and masks to protect against getting anything in your nose or mouth. Because remember, bloodborne pathogens can be contracted through any of your mucous membranes such as your eyes, nose, and mouth. So having the right PPE available to you is very important. And please, resist the urge to help your teammate before protecting yourself. Always ensure your safety is number one before rushing in to help someone else. And yes, I understand this can be very hard to do in those high adrenaline moments, but that's why I keep reminding you. Number four is always use the right tools. Using the correct protective tools such as a hard container for needles and sharps is a must when limiting your exposure. This also includes any broken glass that may have been involved in an incident. Be sure to never use a plastic bag to discard any sharp object. Now, when it comes to cleanup, the best tool for cleanup is what? The answer is a 10% bleach solution, so always use bleach to clean the affected area. Never just wipe it up with a paper towel, even if it's your own blood. Follow the cleanup procedures and the exposure control plan we talked about just a bit ago. Lastly, as it relates to using the right tools, keep a biohazard sticker on any bag or hard container that contains blood or any bodily fluid. Just like the HazCom training we did together on this platform, you must communicate to anyone handling this bag or container that the contents might be biologically hazardous, and universal safety precautions need to be implemented. All right, number five, I want you to always talk to a manager or supervisor if you think you've been exposed to any bodily fluids. There are several medical treatments available, even in cases where you come in direct contact with HIV and hepatitis. But you have to seek that treatment by letting someone know. Also remember that there are hepatitis B vaccinations that can be given and should be provided if your exposure to bodily fluids is high in your day-to-day operations. In this next segment, we're going to run through two scenarios, and I want you to look at the pictures, pause the video on each picture, and give yourself and your teammates enough time to come up with a list of things being done wrong and what the corrective action should be. Then I'll show you a picture of what the corrective action looks like. So in this first picture, pause the video and write down what you would do after learning how to protect yourself from bloodborne pathogens like we just did. Pause the video on this picture now. All right, so let's take a look at what you found. While we can appreciate the teammate trying to rush in and begin applying pressure to the wound, he's clearly not wearing gloves and he's creating more exposure than there needs to be. 101, right? But as we discussed, he was probably well-intentioned and rushed right in. Let me ask you this. What is she wearing that he's not wearing? That's right, she's wearing safety glasses, but he's not. As we learned earlier, viruses like HIV and hepatitis are transmitted through mucous membranes like the eyes, nose, and mouth. He should have safety glasses on to prevent exposure in case of any blood splatter whatsoever. What else did you find? What about where the caregiver is kneeling on the floor? He should have moved away from the blood on the floor to a place he could kneel down and assist without being right in the middle of the blood. Let me also add that this woman is not unconscious, so it would be a best case scenario to direct her to apply pressure to her own wound if possible. Even with gloves, that reduces his exposure that much more. So let's take a look at the corrected picture. First, you see that he's now wearing gloves. Second, you see that they've moved away from the splatter on the ground and that he's also directing her to apply pressure to her own wound. And finally, he's wearing safety glasses to prevent exposure to his eyes. Good job. In the second picture here, I want you to do the same thing. Pause the video now and tell me what needs to be corrected. Okay, so we have this guy that looks as though he's ready to deal with an Ebola outbreak, but right off the bat, he's missing one very obvious thing, that being gloves. But let me add this important point, and actually I'll ask it in the form of a question. Are latex gloves designed to protect you against sharps? The answer is an easy no. So even if you had latex gloves on, he shouldn't be trying to pick up the contaminated sharp objects. The next thing we're looking at here is the fact that he's placing sharps in a plastic bag. While we appreciate the biohazard sticker on the bag, those sharps need to be placed in a sharps container. The third thing I'm seeing in this picture is a mop bucket. It appears as though he's getting ready to mop up the scene, but what did we discuss earlier that he'll need? That's right. You guys are fast learners. He needs to have bleach to effectively clean and decontaminate the area. What you guys need to realize about hepatitis is that it can actually live in the right environment for several days. HIV is a weaker virus when it comes to air exposure, but it can still live for several hours outside of the human body. So that being said, use bleach to nuke that stuff, all right? So now we're going to look at the corrected picture. Here you can see he's wearing gloves, but even still, he's using cardboard to assist in getting the sharps into the pan. Then in the background, you can see that he has the sharps container with the biohazard sticker on it, ready to roll. He also has the bleach standing by to be used for the final touches of the cleanup. Now that we've gone through the various ways bloodborne pathogens can be spread, how to protect yourself, and even a couple scenarios on how to correct typical mistakes, I'm going to take you back through a quick list of always. And it goes a little something like this. Always assume any bodily fluid you may be exposed to has a bloodborne pathogen such as hepatitis B and C or HIV. Always wear the right PPE. Always follow the procedures on your exposure plan. This includes the cleanup of your own blood. Always protect yourself first before rushing to the aid of a teammate. Always use hard containers for sharps and needles. Always use a cleaning agent that has at least a 10% bleach solution. Always communicate hazards that you see in your work area. Always talk to a supervisor if you think you've been exposed. And always reach out to the safety team with any questions you might have about this video, as well as the others in our library. Please remember to practice universal precautions when it comes to your exposure to bodily fluids. And with that being said, even if we don't know you personally, please know we care about you. Until the next time and the next training.